So this is Jeff and Meredith. Hey, Meredith, how are you?
Hey, Jeff, I'm great. Glad to be here.
So thanks for inviting us both to talk about this topic. This is something we're both personally passionate about. And I think April's session kind of set this up in a way because I would argue part of the re-engagement, the great re-engagement, is a company expressing its values and creating a sense of pride and connectivity to their employees about the company doing good things. And I think, let me start, Meredith, by asking you, what have you seen in your role the past 2 years? For me, 2020 was a bellwether year in terms of companies leaning in, but take the group back to 2020, 2021, what you saw, how you guys responded differently to the challenges.
Absolutely happy to. And I echo your thanks to the ANA team, the sponsors, and Kim for this really engaging series of sessions. You know, it's interesting. I've spent most of my professional career in professional services. I've never actually repped a product. Our product is our people. And, going through the last 18 months between COVID, the social justice movement across a number of races and ethnicities, and then adding on what we saw in the political space and engagement there. It really truly was a bellwether year, and the companies that had frankly been focused on inclusion and diversity for quite some time already were so much more well positioned to really use it as a moment to put their foot on the gas, both internally as well as externally. So with their people as well as with organizations they partnered with, but no one was immune, if you will. Everybody had to look at how could they do more? How could they double down on their efforts? How could they think of new innovative ways to engage their people and how to engage external communities. And so, that has really been an interesting lesson for me, was that no matter how good we thought we were at any of this, it fundamentally shifted. And I think the pace was also so accelerated with just the news media, social media, the delightful fishbowl that we all love to look at on the internal communication side. People wanted to hear from us faster. They wanted more concrete actions, and they were not willing to wait.
And you said you've spent most of your career in B2B, and I'm kind of the flip. I've spent most of my career in B2C. I think the B2C brands are used to reflecting the issues, the topics du jour, because they have this nexus to their consumers, their end consumers. But talk a little bit about, I think historically, the B2B guys have kind of had a pass, right? And culturally, B2B brands have been more reticent to weigh in on these kind of issues. As I said, I think the consumer brands have always had to, because they're interacting with those customers every day. But talk about, is this a new era for B2B brands?
I think there is some truth in your statement, given that we are in the business of people. What we've seen, particularly in the younger generations that have come into the workforce, right? We have 5 generations in the workforce now. They want even their B2B company that they work for out there on issues because it's important to them. They want to know that their company and the values that their company holds align to their personal values, that their company's purpose is aligned to their personal purpose. And I will say we had the added piece, particularly in the last 18 months, of our clients coming to us and looking for us to be hand in hand out there with them, signing statements of support for local chambers of commerce, taking action in their local communities with them, doing good in communities through apprentice programs, through mentoring programs. In a more heightened way. We had that with some clients, I think, historically, but there was definitely an uptick in how many were looking to us to see if our values align to theirs. Um, in this kind of new wave of attention on ESG and DEI in particular.
And, you know, we're talking about this as more of a current phenomenon, but when you and I spoke a couple of days ago, you talked about how years ago, right, when some of these states and municipalities were signing these bathroom bills and these anti-LGBT initiatives. Talk about, you know, what you saw brewing years ago.
Yep, absolutely. So I was delighted to see Kim as the MC today. I was fortunate to start my career in marketing communications at Deloitte and spent my early days in government relations there. And, you know, Deloitte was ahead of the curve. Other organizations have been as well. Frankly, I've been fortunate to work at a lot of companies where I've worked closely with our public policy teams to make sure that we were supporting bills, supporting candidates, or opposing legislation that didn't align to our values. And so many people will remember, for example, the transgender bathroom legislation that came through North Carolina many years ago at the state legislature level. And, you know, Deloitte was out in front, you know, being very outspoken against it. I've been fortunate to work on a lot of public policy issues where we've taken a similar stance at other companies, because it doesn't align to where we stand on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think there's been a lot of that. I think it's been done more quietly in the past, through you know, lobbying and relationships, sometimes open letters, but open letters tend to get a lot of local press coverage, but not a ton at the national level. And then you look at the advent of the past 18 months when you had groups of CEOs taking out full page ads in the New York Times to very boldly declare their support. And they were looking at their fellow CEOs, and it didn't matter if they were B2B or B2C, they wanted their names in print alongside them.
So what's your advice to the audience? I mean, because this could get really dicey. Like, what do you weigh in on? What do you not weigh in on? What's the line? Everyone's watching what's happening in Texas right now. You know, would you advise your clients to weigh in on a topic like that? So tell me what advice you're giving to your clients on where is the line? And I know you and I talked about, there's been some research recently about no-fly zones.
Yes. So I'm a big fan of Fleishman-Hillard's authenticity gap research. And they do a really nice deep dive into what consumers, so it's more on the B2C side, but I think a lot of it is applicable to B2B because the companies are interested in what their consumers are interested in, what they want to hear from companies on, what issues they do and what issues they don't. And there are a couple that rank really high. Data privacy is actually one that's top of mind for a lot of consumers. There, you know, are a few others. Immigration generally ranks very high, but issues like abortion aren't as high up on the list for people because they are a little bit more divisive. Immigration is always one where people are looking for companies to engage. And it really, again, comes down to values. And that's where my advice always comes in, is that any company needs to work very closely with their government relations team, public policy, whatever you call it, to ensure that any actions they're taking, public statements they're making, legislation they're supporting is aligned to their company's values and that there's no disconnect. And also, by the way, looking for opportunities, right? When I was at Accenture, we ended up joining a coalition of over 200 companies and frankly leading the coalition with the Human Rights Campaign to the amicus brief that went to the Supreme Court on LGBTQ anti-discrimination legislation. There was a trio of cases they were reviewing. And that was incredibly true and authentic to Accenture as a brand. They have an incredible pride community and have for a long time. And so they were ready and willing and able to lead that very bold public statement of their support for the community. And you can only do that if you are authentic and true within your own organization in supporting that community.
Absolutely. In the consulting practice I lead, GRC, we tell our clients, people will come to us. One of the lanes we really focus on is climate, right, and environmental sustainability. And people will say that they want to lead on this issue, and we'll say, well, yes, but you better make sure, you better look internally and make sure that, if you want to make a claim over here, what is your own internal assessment of where you are in these other areas, right? So it's very easy to pick and choose what you want to beat your chest about. Talk also about failure, because this world we're in, this world of social purpose, social good, et cetera, is not without detractors and not without mistakes being made. It's not zero tolerance. So the other thing that we always advise people is that you're going to make mistakes, right? And you better be prepared for that. So said another way, companies need to understand their risk tolerance. I worked on a project years ago for any former colleagues that were with me at Nature Conservancy. We did a promotion with Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. And, it seemed like a good idea at the time. It was a good idea because the models legitimately wanted to shine a light on degraded beaches where they were doing these shoots. But we had several of our constituents who were concerned about aligning with the magazine and that content. And so we took some hits. The good news is the management team was evolved enough and confident and courageous enough to stand by the decision.
Nice.
But we all remember Pepsi when they went out with the Kendall Jenner ad, right? So, and Gillette with the men and boys ad. So how do you counsel your clients about risk, zero tolerance, recovering from mistakes? Because once you start, you can't pull it back, right?
You can't, that's true. And again, this comes down to authenticity. Do you have kind of the right to speak out on what you're doing? And that's always the first stop. I think embracing the knowledge that not everybody is going to like what you're doing and being okay with that risk is really critical. And I think that's where really the C-suite comes in and their ability to take that risk and how they think about it. I think back to EY did a Super Bowl ad this year in several markets. And we chose to go the social justice route in the content of the ad, not a business play at all. But you either go for the heart or the laughs in the Super Bowl, and we went with heart and really wanted to speak to folks about our commitment to social justice and equity. And that was a real gamble for us. I mean, you don't know how that's going to play. And it turned out really well, and it was really positively received. But that was our BMC, brand marketing and communications team, working hand in hand with our chair and her executive committee to make the decision to do that, and on a very short notice. But it is something you have to be willing to say, like, not everybody is going to probably love this, but if you have the credibility to back it up, and as a company it's true to your values and what you believe, then you go forward. On the flip side, I've been on teams that have supported executives and sent out notes, or seen other leaders send out notes, particularly in the wake of tragic events. I tend to refer to them as comfort notes, because they're trying to do outreach, particularly on the internal side, to their people, sometimes on the external side too, when they post publicly on social media. I've seen some of it fall really flat, because if you kind of emote all over people rather than meeting them where they are, it has a tendency to not go terribly well. Or if it's a topic that you've been silent on and just spoken up to, that also isn't received well, right? So some of it is also looking at your history, your values, and then mapping what is the right way to engage at any given moment on something particularly that's happening externally. The last piece of advice that I always have is, like, don't rush. Everybody wants to be the first out of the gate to comment on things. And sometimes you need to hang back and see how things evolve, particularly with, events that happen. I always remind folks, we are not a news organization. Like, we are not here to report the facts. So let's see how everything unfolds with a tragic incident in particular, and then let's talk about how to engage. But until we have a little bit more information, you really need to hang back and wait. And it's hard because your consumers, your employees want to hear from you, your clients want to hear from you sometimes, but there is a little bit less of a risk of failure if you take a beat, get the right folks on the phone to have a conversation, and then determine your best path forward.
There's one that's playing out real time, and I don't have the answer here, and I don't know if you'll want to comment on this, but I'm fascinated, concerned, and watching closely the whole Facebook, Instagram issue, right? And the role of social media in both, the implications to democracy, the implications to depression with young teens. Any thoughts on that situation? Any, if Facebook were in the room, any advice for them, Meredith?
I think they have an excellent team. And I'm going to comment more specifically on kind of, these broader topics, not specific to Facebook and Instagram. I think it's a case where you really have to look at what the market is telling you and think through how things are going to land.
Yep.
And all the different dimensions, kind of like playing chess in your head. And I think sometimes people only think a move ahead, and you need to really play out all the scenarios to fully see the board and what's in front of you and how things will be taken. I think oftentimes too, people and companies get very excited about things, and they end up being really short-sighted as a result, and they don't think about all the dimensions, or they're also not inclusive in their decision making. And that goes back to like getting the right people on the phone. Sometimes a tight-knit circle making a decision is not a great idea, because you need diversity of opinions and experiences to talk about, any type of market move in particular that you're making, because what may seem fine to me may not to someone else.
Let's shift gears a minute. And, some people feel this is a response, this is an aberration. I feel fervently this is a new normal, right? I went to Wharton, I studied business. I always tell people that any student of business knows it's about stakeholder value. Your community, stakeholder, your employee, stakeholders, your shareholders, stakeholders. But we spend 90% of our time talking about shareholders. Through your lens, talk a little bit about the underpinnings of this relative to the capital markets. BlackRock has come out and talked about ESG and SDG. JP Morgan is talking about ESG and SDG. From your lens, is this in fact a new normal, and where do you see it going?
So I love what was shared in the Future Brand Index session earlier today around how you have to always evolve to stay relevant. And I don't think this is our new normal. I don't think we know what our new normal is anymore. There is no normal anymore. This is just going to constantly change, and the pendulum is going to swing. There's a way to be proactive in some ways around it, but you've got to really pay attention, and this is in particular where your employee resource groups come in handy, because a lot of times they will see things coming before you will. So I really rely heavily on them. In terms of is this where companies are going in the capital markets? I absolutely think so. I think a big indicator of that was the Business Roundtable 2.5 years ago at this point, updating their mission statement and very loudly declaring that the concept of sustainability is here, and they were really rethinking about it in relationship to their purpose. I think we've also seen a lot of companies and brands really taking a good inward look and redefining what their purpose is. Right, at EY, ours is to build a better working world. And there are a lot of dimensions of that are intrinsically tied to ESG. It's a huge new space for us, both with our clients, and one that's expanding even internally with how we function as a company. And I think that is really just going to continue to move forward. We've also seen it. I mean, Davos for me, I, just wait for Klaus to put out what the topics are every year. And his notes I find so informative in terms of kind of where the business community is going. And I think this is just going to continue to trend in that direction.
And then talk a little bit about global. I mean, are you seeing similar trends around the world? Are there markets that you think are leading? Is the US a leader? Is Europe a leader on these kind of social issues as they relate to capitalism?
I think that in particular in diversity, equity, inclusion, everybody's a leader in a different way because everyone is at a different stage with some of their diverse communities. You look at Canada and they're really having a reckoning with their Indigenous community, right? The UK is really digging in with their Black community. And so I think people are to certain degrees. I think ESG overall, absolutely. It's a global thing. This is not just the US. I think there are variations on a theme. Some are more concerned with the environmental piece and sustainability. Some countries are more focused on the diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice space. It really is kind of region to region. Again, a lot of that is cultural and where they are, especially on the social justice piece.
And then do you think there's certain sectors, certain industries that this is a lot more relevant for from a B2B perspective? You think it's across the board?
I think it's across the board. I really do.
And then let's talk about, this group tends to skew to Fortune 500s. We really talk about the smaller guys. What do you think is happening with small business, and how is this impacting them? I live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I can talk to some of my experiences in my neighborhood, but have you seen any data or any conversation around small business and how corporate social responsibility, ESG, any of these issues are hitting them? That this notion of having to step up and affirmatively build social purpose into their daily workflow.
So I saw a great poll today looking at a series of questions about fill in the blank with someone from the opposite political party as you and the opposite presidential candidate. Would you date someone who voted for?
I saw that
right?
study. Yeah.
One of the questions was, would you shop at a business
Right.
whose owner voted for a different presidential? And it was like some ridiculous percent of people wouldn't. And I was like, how do you know what? Who you're the owner of whatever shop voted for. I live in Washington, D.C. I frequent a lot of small businesses, and frankly, it's something that hadn't occurred to me. And now I'm like, oh, interesting. I know a lot of the owners. I don't know their political position on things, but it was a really fascinating piece of information. Now, I don't know how people find out some of that. I think from a small business perspective, your social media and what you allow on that probably would be at least some indicator for your customers as to where you stand on certain issues, to see if their values align to yours. I don't know. That poll today made me stop and think in a way that I really didn't even think about before I saw it.
Without sounding corny, I think the role of companies in bridging some of these divides is critical. And it just stuns me how divided we have become over such a large range of issues. And I'm hoping that the companies, large and small, can create some kind of centrifugal force to bring people back to the middle. So Kim, I think we wanted to allocate the last 2 minutes or so to any questions. Do you have any questions for us?
I think you all were so thorough in your coverage here, but maybe Meredith in particular, and Jeff, if you want to weigh in, how do we become more proactive versus reactive? I think Meredith alluded to it. She in a bunch of different ways that she does, but in a nutshell, what should we be thinking about as to how to be kind of on our toes rather than on our heels around this topic?
To me, it's always about looking for like what's next, right? Some of it is white space, right? Because you've got to figure out where, because everybody's flocking to this topic, right? So where are you differentiated in your business that you can carve out a nice place to talk about this, right? And have a voice. Again, I will go back to, I rely deeply on our professional networks at EY, and have over the course of my career at various companies, because they are the heart and the lifeblood. To the comment section around today has been about people. It is for B2B in particular. Our people are our product, and their health and wellness and how they feel is the health and wellness of our business. And so to me, that's where that's where you stay ahead, is if you have the pulse of your people and they're in the different communities within your organization. I think that's really what helps you be as proactive as possible.
And I would echo that. When I was at the Nature Conservancy, we had issues of gender and race, and we hired a chief diversity officer. We started ERGs, and I was a little skeptical, right? I wasn't sure if it was more gimmicky or if it was really authentic. And the ERGs served as that early warning mechanism on so many issues. So I would echo what you say, that the power of the people, but specifically the construct of the ERGs, I've seen across a multiple of different situations be the real eyes and ears of the organization to help dial them into some of these issues.
Jeff and Meredith, really another invaluable session. That makes 7 invaluable sessions in all. And it brings us to the end of B2B Day.